He didn't come for the photo. He didn't come for the handshake. Michael Reyes stood at the back of the line, hands in his pockets, eyes low beneath a worn-out baseball cap. His army jacket hung loose on his frame, faded patches, frayed seams, and the unmistakable heaviness of someone who carried more than just fabric on his shoulders. To anyone else, he looked like another vet here for the charity event, just another man among many, waiting to shake hands with Sylvester Stallone and maybe get a signed photo of Rambo. But that's not why he was here. He had rehearsed the words all morning, words he had never said out loud, not to his sister, not to his therapist, not even to himself in the mirror. The line moved. A few fans ahead of him laughed, snapped selfies, thanked Stallone for Rocky, for Rambo, for being a fighter. Stallone, charismatic as ever, even in his 70s, had the same grin, the same warmth in his eyes. The cameras loved him. So did the crowd. Michael looked down at the dog tag in his hand. It wasn't his. It belonged to his best friend. He had died in Kandahar. Michael was supposed to be with him on that patrol, but a last-minute change had kept him back. When the IED hit, his friend was killed instantly. For years, Michael blamed himself, and for years, he had been slowly disappearing inside his own silence, until one night. Until that movie. The line moved again. A veteran in a wheelchair rolled up to Stallone, said something that made the actor laugh. Michael watched, unmoving. Then it was his turn. He stepped forward. Stallone extended his hand. "Hey, brother. Thanks for coming." Michael stared at him. Then quietly he said, "Rambo saved me from suicide." The words dropped like a stone in a still lake. For a second, Stallone blinked, as if unsure he'd heard right. But Michael didn't flinch. "I mean it," he added, voice steady. "There was a night, a bad one. I had everything ready. I had a letter written. Then I put on First Blood, just to hear something besides my own thoughts." He paused. "And when it ended, I wasn't ready to go anymore. Therefore, he never pulled the trigger. But he never told anyone either, until now." Stallone's smile had vanished. His eyes, those same intense eyes that once stared down a jungle in Vietnam, that had become symbols of defiance and pain, now brimmed with something deeper. He stepped around the table. No cameras, no stage voice, just the man behind the icon. He placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. "What's your name?" "Michael Reyes." "You got a minute?" Michael nodded. Stallone turned to the event organizer. "Give me 5. They walked off to the side, into the shade of a quiet corner behind the tent. The noise faded. Only the wind in the flags remained, and the faint murmur of people waiting. Michael didn't know how to explain it all at once, so he started with the jacket. "This belonged to my friend, Jason. He used to quote Rambo all the time, like a damn preacher. After he died, I stopped watching movies. I stopped everything. I stopped being myself. And then one night, I put it on again. First Blood. I don't know what I expected. Maybe to feel something. What I didn't expect was to see myself in it. The way Rambo talked, the way he was treated, the way he broke. I knew that pain. It was mine." Stallone listened. Not like a celebrity, not like someone performing empathy, but like a man who understood what it meant to be broken in private. "You wrote him for people like me, didn't you?" Michael asked. Stallone took a breath. "No, Mike. I wrote him for myself. You just happened to recognize the same war." Flashback. The night Michael almost didn't make it. He had cleaned the house, left instructions, pulled out the photograph of Jason. The weight in his chest had finally felt too heavy. He poured a drink, sat on the couch, and turned on the TV without thinking. There it was. Rain. Dogs barking. A man with nothing but a backpack and a stare that refused to blink. Rambo. By the time the end credits rolled, Michael was sitting up, breathing, sweating, and crying hard. Not because he was sad, but because for the first time in years, someone on that screen looked like he felt inside. Someone was fighting to stay alive, even when no one wanted him to. Back in the present, Stallone reached into his coat and pulled out a small pendant. a medallion with St. Michael engraved on it. My mother gave this to me before I went to LA. Said I'd need protection. I've carried it for 50 years. He held it out. I think you need it more. Michael hesitated. I can't take that. You already did, Stallone replied. The moment you stayed alive. The cameras came back. The people surrounded them again. But the real scene had already ended. The moment when the man behind Rambo reminded another broken soldier that being seen, even for 5 minutes, can save a life. Michael had never been called a hero, not even once. Not by his commanding officer, not by the VA, not by the people who crossed the street when they saw him talking to himself outside the grocery store. The medals in his drawer meant nothing when the nightmares woke him up gasping, fists clenched, screaming Jason's name into the darkness. But now, as he sat in the folding chair beside Sylvester Stallone, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Seen, not as a ghost, not as a problem, not as a file number buried in bureaucracy, but as a man. A wounded man, sure, but still a man. The next hour passed quietly under the tent, where a few veterans rested with coffee and quiet conversation. Stallone had insisted Michael stay, not as a guest, but as a friend. The handlers didn't question it. They had seen the change in his eyes. Michael clutched the St. Michael medallion in his fist. He still didn't feel like he deserved it, but something about it made him breathe a little easier. Maybe it wasn't about deserving. Maybe it was about needing. They talked about things people never ask Stallone about. Do you regret making him, Rambo, so brutal? Michael asked. Stallone leaned back. You mean, do I regret making pain visible? Michael raised his eyebrows. I wrote Rambo to be a scream no one wanted to hear, Stallone said. But it turns out, millions were screaming with him. I just gave them a face. Later that night, after most of the crowd had left, Michael waited at the sidewalk for his sister to pick him up. Angela was late. Again, he didn't mind. The air felt different, as if something inside him had shifted, loosened. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he needed to run from it. A voice broke his thoughts. Hey, came a gruff voice. You're the guy from earlier, right? The one who talked to Stallone? Michael turned to see a man in his late 50s, broad shoulders, leather vest, tattoo on his forearm, a faded flag with a torn heart over it. Yeah, the man extended a hand. Name's Clay. I was there too. Heard what you said. Michael didn't answer, just nodded. I used to think all that hero talk was bullshit, Clay continued. But hearing you say what you did, that took guts, man. Real guts. Michael looked away. Compliments made his skin itch. Clay stepped closer. You gave something to everyone who was too scared to say it themselves. You don't even know what you did. But something in Michael resisted that praise. Therefore, he said what had always come easier. Deflection. I'm no hero, he muttered. I'm just a guy who got lucky. Clay narrowed his eyes. No, you're a guy who survived. There's a difference. Lucky people don't go back for others. Angela finally pulled up. Sorry. Traffic was murder. She smiled at Clay, then focused on Michael. You okay? Yeah, he said, stepping into the car. But he wasn't, because deep down, something was unraveling. That night, alone in his apartment, Michael sat on his couch, St. Michael's medallion in hand, and replayed the moment with Stallone in his head over and over. The way his voice cracked when he said, Rambo saved me. The way Stallone looked at him, not like a fan, but like an equal. And yet, he felt like a fraud. Flashback again. Not the night of the movie, but the night before it. The night he had made the decision to end it all. He had sat with a pen in hand and tried to write to Jason, tried to explain why he couldn't do it anymore. But halfway through the letter, he started crying. And when he cried, he laughed. Because the only words he could hear in his head were from Rambo, First Blood Part 2. I want what they want, and every other guy who came over here and spilled his guts wants for our country to love us as much as we love it. He laughed because it hurt so damn much to want something that simple. And that's when he turned on the TV. That's when the survival began. The next morning, Michael walked into the Veteran Center near his home, the one he had avoided for months. He asked to speak at the next support group. They were surprised. "Are you sure?" the director asked. "I have something I need to say." That evening, he stood before a dozen veterans, some in wheelchairs, some wearing oxygen tubes, some younger, still clinging to anger, others older, brittle and hollow-eyed. They watched him with that same guarded stare. Men who had seen too much, lost too much, and learned to say too little. Michael cleared his throat. He wasn't good with speeches. He wasn't trained for this. He just knew one thing. Someone out there had to hear what he wished he'd heard years ago. "My name is Michael Reyes," he began. "And I'm not okay, but I'm alive, and that counts for something." It started with a letter. Not the suicide note, the one he never finished, but a new letter, one he wrote 3 weeks after meeting Stallone. A letter he didn't expect anyone to read, much less respond to. It began simply, "Dear veterans of America, I don't have a title. I don't have medals that matter. But I'm still here, and I think that counts." He wrote about the guilt, about Jason, about the movie, about the strange, beautiful ache of watching Rambo bleed on screen and realizing, for the first time, that pain could look noble. He didn't call himself a survivor. He called himself a translator of silence. Because that's what he felt most days, not shame or fear, silence. A kind so loud it echoed in his bones. He mailed it to 5 addresses. 2 replied. 1 printed it in their monthly newsletter, and somehow that was enough. Therefore, Michael began receiving emails, hundreds, then thousands. Veterans from all over the country wrote him, Marines, nurses, Navy SEALs, cooks, mechanics, amputees, medics, even Gold Star mothers. Some just said, "Me too." Some wrote long, trembling stories of nights in motels, pills in the drawer, and a last-minute decision to live, because of something they saw, something they remembered, something they weren't even sure was real. But not everyone liked it. One email came with no name, just one sentence. "You're romanticizing trauma. You should be ashamed." Michael read it over and over, and the worst part was, he almost agreed. Had he made it sound too heroic? Had he turned pain into poetry because he didn't know how to just bleed in silence anymore? He turned off the phone. He didn't sleep that night. Angela noticed the change. She stopped by his apartment that weekend, brought coffee like always. "You okay?" she asked, sitting beside him on the floor where he'd been staring at a blank wall. "I think I made it worse," he whispered. "Worse for who?" "For everyone who reads my words and thinks there's something wrong with them because they don't feel brave, because Rambo didn't save them, because they're still angry, still broken." Angela took his hand. "You didn't write to be worshipped. You wrote so people didn't have to feel alone." He didn't respond, but he squeezed her hand. Hard. The Revolta wasn't the hate. It came 2 days later. Stallone called. Not a PR manager, not an assistant, not a publicist. Stallone, himself. "I saw what you wrote," he said. "You ready to speak somewhere bigger?" Michael's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "There's a conference, big one. Hundreds of people, veterans, families, congressmen, senators, some media. I think you should tell your story." Michael didn't say yes. Not immediately. He stared at the phone, at the St. Michael medallion hanging from a nail in the wall, at the unfinished letter he kept in a drawer, Jason's name still visible in ink. He called Clay. "Am I out of my mind?" he asked. Clay laughed. "No. You're finally in it." 1 week later, Michael walked onto a stage in Washington, D.C. He wasn't polished. He wasn't calm. He had his army jacket, a shaky hand, and a printed copy of the letter. The lights were blinding. The crowd was silent. He took a breath, then another. And then he said the line that had lived in his chest since the day it all changed. "Rambo saved me from suicide." There were no gasps, no laughs, just stillness. He kept going. He told them everything, the patrol, the IED, the guilt, the silence, the movie, the laugh, the survival, the medallion, the emails, the hate, the doubt, the tears, the truth. And when he was done, he folded the paper and simply said, "I'm still not okay, but I'm not gone, and that matters." The applause was slow, then swelling, then thunderous. Afterward, a woman approached him backstage, early 30s, civilian clothes. "I'm not a soldier," she said. "But my brother was. He didn't make it. But if he'd heard what you said, maybe he would have." She hugged him. Michael didn't know how to respond. He just cried. Later, alone in a hotel room, he looked in the mirror and whispered something he hadn't dared before. "Jason, I'm still here." He closed his eyes. The silence didn't echo like it used to. Foreshadowing builds. Back home, Clay handed Michael a box. "I found something," he said. "Belonged to Jason. I kept it. Didn't know why. Maybe I do now." Inside was a worn cassette tape, labeled Rambo, for when it gets bad. Michael played it. It wasn't the movie. It was Jason, talking. His voice young, full of fire, of hope, of the kind of love only a brother in arms can carry. "Mike," the voice said, "if you're hearing this, you're still alive. That's all that matters." Michael sank to the floor, tape still playing. That was the real Revolta. Jason had known. Jason had always known. He didn't come for the photo. But now there was a photo. Michael didn't ask for it. Stallone sent it. A single frame, candid, taken by someone backstage at the conference. In it, Stallone stands behind Michael as he speaks, one hand on his shoulder, both men half in shadow, half in light. The note on the back said, "This is what Rambo was for." Sly Michael pinned it to his wall beside the St. Michael medallion. He didn't look at it every day. He didn't have to, because something inside had shifted, not healed, not erased, but acknowledged. The story spread. A local news outlet picked it up, then another, then Veterans Voices Weekly, then a podcast, then a national story, then TikTok of all places. Clips of Michael's speech went viral, and then came the emails again. But this time they didn't come alone. They came with invitations. Colleges, churches, prisons, high schools, military academies, VA clinics, senators' offices. People didn't want Rambo. They wanted the translator of silence. Michael said yes to almost everything. He wasn't always polished. He stammered sometimes. His hands still trembled. He didn't sugarcoat anything. But that's what made people lean in. They didn't come to be impressed. They came to feel less alone. One night, after a particularly hard event at a rehab center for veterans struggling with addiction, Michael sat in his hotel room scrolling through the latest emails. One stood out. Subject: "You saved my son." It was from a mother in Texas. Her son had tried to end his life. But before he did, he watched the clip of Michael talking about not being okay, but not gone. He had written a note to his mother, then erased it, then walked into her room and simply said, "I think I want to fight like Rambo did." Michael closed the laptop and wept into his hands. This wasn't just about Jason anymore. It never had been. It was about all of them. Angela visited the next morning. She brought coffee and something else. A box. "What's this?" She smiled. "They sent it to the house. I think you've been drafted." Inside, there was a folded letter, an official certificate, and a small plaque. The National Medal of Civilian Courage, awarded to Michael Reyes for transforming personal suffering into national service, for refusing silence, for saving lives with honesty. Michael stared at it for a long time, then set it on the shelf, then picked it up again, then finally said out loud, "I wish Jason could see this." Angela put a hand on his back. "He can." Final closure began at a cemetery, Jason's. Michael hadn't visited in years, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't think he deserved to stand there. This time he came with flowers, a folded American flag, and the cassette tape. He placed it all down, knelt beside the grave and whispered, "I didn't die, but I did something better." 3 months later, Stallone invited him to a private set. Not a movie, a documentary. Title: The Real Fight, What Rambo Left Behind. Michael stood under the lights, unsure. Stallone handed him a script. "Not for acting," he said. Just talk, like you always do. Michael chuckled. You sure they want to hear from me again? Stallone didn't smile. He nodded. They need to. On screen, Michael told the story. But this time, he didn't start with pain. He started with the moment he didn't pull the trigger. The moment a movie screamed louder than the voices in his head. The moment silence broke. He ended with a line no one expected. Sometimes, the hero isn't the one who runs into fire. Sometimes, it's the one who stays when everything says to leave. The documentary aired 6 months later. Over 1 million views in a week. But Michael didn't watch it. Not right away. He was busy that day, speaking to a group of high school kids. At the end of the event, a quiet teen in the back raised his hand. Can I ask something? Sure. Do you think anyone can be Rambo? Michael smiled, knelt beside the boy and said, Rambo is just a name. Survival's the real badge. And if you're still here, you've already earned it. Looping back. Later that night, Michael sat on his couch, lights dim, cassette tape in hand. He pressed play. Jason's voice again. But this time, he didn't cry. He smiled and whispered, You were right. I stayed. He didn't come for the photo, but now the photo hangs on his wall, because sometimes being seen just once is enough to save you forever. Thank you so much for watching. Your time means everything to us, and we hope this story moved you as much as it moved us. If it did, please consider leaving a comment, sharing the video, and subscribing to the channel, because powerful stories deserve to be heard.